The Legend of Korra, a sequel to Avatar The Last Airbender, and it's loved or hated by fans. Today we're going to look at every episode in The Legend of Korra and rank them. Well, we're just going to rank the ones in Book 1. You may see I have a video about Avatar The Last Airbender ranking every single episode and find it strange for me to only rank one book of Korra, but the difference is I'm very experienced when it comes to Avatar. Korra is a show that I've only seen once, so while making this video, it's only my second time watching the show. I'm going to try and be as thorough as possible. I will give each episode a rank from 1 to 10, and I will also give it a letter grade. So without any further waiting, let's get right to it. The pilot is possibly the most important episode to establish the tone of not only the season, but the entire show. Across the community, Korra is typically understood to be a more mature sequel to Atla, with the target demographic of a much older audience, which makes sense as they intended to keep their original fanbase and not veer too far off. It's pretty easy to see this from the opening scene with Tenzin recounting Atla in a very serious manner, and that's just reminding you of the story you already love. The first actual scene of Korra and her story is... I know I've harped on this scene in my Dragon Prince video, and I got a lot of backlash. I get it. It's a small scene, and it's pretty much untied to the rest of Korra as a character and the show, but that's the whole point of why this scene sucks so hard. It has nothing to do with the story, and it's a drastic tonal shift from the introduction with Tenzin. So while you can just ignore it, it shouldn't have been included from the get-go. Having toddler Korra flaunt her avatar status and ability to bend 3 elements, including one that she should struggle the most with learning, fire, is almost an insult to Aang's journey within a minute of the show starting. Anyways, I can't stay on this one scene forever, but I really don't like it. There is a lot of good stuff packed into the pilot as well. With this being a far more advanced world than we saw in Avatar, they were hard-pressed to jam a fuckload of world building into a single episode. The establishing shots of Republic City are pretty cool, and while I'm not a huge fan of the idea of making it like 1920s New York when we were previously in the Steel Age, they sell it pretty well. Korra herself, after that cursed childhood scene, is also pretty well defined for a pilot. She's extremely driven towards her goals, even if it means being a bit selfish, which is a good thing. I want a protagonist who has flaws. Having her walk around like she's untouchable with stuff like the fight with the Triple Triad, and insinuating that Lin drops the charges just because she's the Avatar really shows her headspace at the start of the series. Finally, the pilot has to introduce Amon and his whole thing, and it's probably the coolest thing they decided to do with this season. The world is at peace, but humans by nature are not peaceful. Benders literally have superpowers, so it's pretty realistic that non-benders would feel inadequate, if not oppressed by their limitations, and seeing it in the pilot as a type of civil rights movement is a super interesting angle for the story to go. I think this episode is around the range of a 6 out of 10 or B-tier episode. I genuinely believe that the scene with Kid Korra and Ikki lower its score by at least a point, if not more, so it could have been higher. Episode 2 is basically in 2 halves. One of the halves being Korra absolutely failing at learning anything Tenzin attempts to teach her about airbending, and the other half being the introduction of pro-bending, and by extension Bolin and Mako. Korra seemingly puts almost no effort into taking Tenzin's lesson before throwing in the towel and throwing a tantrum. And while I said I like a protagonist with flaws, I don't like the whole brat quitting after 2 days aspect, especially when the Avatar is supposed to take years to become fully realized, and surely growing up around the White Lotus, she would know that by now. Pro bending is a bit of a disappointment. It's basically sumo wrestling with 3 bending styles when they could have done something way cooler with it. Do you remember in the original series, in Tales of Ba Sing Se, there was this cool soccer earthbending thing? Ideas like that could be really cool. They could have integrated bending into so many sports in such a creative way, but instead they just do sumo with these weird water grates and earth destructo discs. While we're on the topic, why does fire in Korra seem to just be like a push? Some of these pro benders get hit by repeated waves of fire, and it looks like they just got punched instead of incinerated on spot or something. I don't know. Mako and Bolin, as of their introductions, are fairly one note, but you can't really judge a character on their first episode. Bolin is clearly intended to be a high-spirited character, and Mako the quiet, pretty boy. They do get fleshed out later, but their first impressions are pretty tropey. I'd say this is 6 out of 10 as well, probably chilling in the B tier with the pilot. Now we're talking. Episode 3 opens with the sports team being confronted about needing hella bread to be allowed to play in their tournament, which is a huge issue for a group of 3 people with 17 cents between them. Bolin deciding to do some gang shit while Mako tells us about their past is a cool way to both show and tell their hardships they had to face, and develop them past the trope thing I was just talking about. But the episode really hits with both the fight choreography between Korra and the goons being super smooth and fun to watch, and it peaks during the Equalist rally. I think Amon and the Equalist are a really cool angle, but on top of that, as soon as Amon displays his ability to seemingly energy bend on the leader of the Triple Triads, we're introduced to serious fucking business territory. Like, Bolin was moments away from his shit being gone for good, and if that isn't high stakes, I don't know what is. There's some issues, of course. I don't like that we're shown lightning bending twice in the course of an episode in a really nonchalant fashion. The leader of the Triple Triads being able to do it makes sense since he's an older guy and probably pretty powerful to have worked to be in the position he's in, but Mako uses it for hard labor, and there doesn't seem to be any like heavy martial arts style movement or like separation of negative positive energy. He's just shooting lightning out of his fingertips. This is the best episode so far, certainly. 8 out of 10 or A tier. Episode 4, we're introduced to Asami, who just so happens to be the richest person within Korra and the gang's age group on the planet, which remedies the money issue that we just established in the blink of an eye. Overly convenient? Maybe, but it doesn't matter too much to be an actual problem. Asami adds to the already complex love triangle that was brewing between the Fire Ferrets by instantly taking Mako from Korra's eye, and as a romance fan, I like the complexity that she adds to that side of the story. But then we have Tarlok trying to make this anti-Amon task force and borderline forcing Korra to join with social pressure. At first I felt bad for Korra for having no choice in being put in that situation, but then she decides to go somewhere alone and invite Amon to fight her, and then she cries when she gets jumped. He doesn't even take her shit right then and there, and if he did, his plan would have succeeded without fail. He just says some ominous shit and then bounces. This one felt a bit slow, and I'd say it dips back down to the 6 out of 10 range, back down to the lower B tier. Here's where we see the start of my major issue with Book 1 of Korra. As much as the last episode slowed down, it was still centered on the idea of Amon and the Equalists. And then moving into this episode, right after Korra had that traumatic encounter with him, we have an episode that has nothing to do with it at all, and is basically just teen romance and more pro-bending. Look, I understand that you can have multiple moving parts to a story at one time and it still work perfectly fine, but the issue is cohesion. Having Korra go from the task force to stop Amon to this love triangle shit with absolutely no mention of the other story is like narrative whiplash. The romance angle is fine, I'm not against it or anything, and with this being a teen-centric show, the way they're portraying teenage romance to be so volatile and extreme is like pretty on the nose. But it can still be a bit too much. Like Bolin seeing Mako and Korra kiss, for example. He looks like absolutely devastated and the scene head impact, and then he starts to sob and looks cartoonish and it just sullies the moment. I don't know, I really didn't like this one. 3 out of 10, like barely holding on to the D tier. Finally, a good fucking episode. This episode takes the foundations from the weaker episodes and combines them flawlessly to make a super entertaining, action-packed chapter. The pro-bending stuff finally comes into the Amon storyline, which is, in my opinion, the main story, so it no longer feels like unnecessary filler. It makes sense that Amon would want to make some sort of grand display of the reigning champions in front of as many people as possible, so I like that they did that. The action sequences throughout the entire episode are also really well animated and fun to watch, and it feels like this is the moment when the book really starts to kick into overdrive. Whether or not that momentum can be carried on, we'll see in just a bit, but this one was fantastic. It's hard to talk about because it was mostly action, but it was really good. 9 out of 10, I'm gonna give it an A+. Gotta save the S tier for something truly special, and this one is just like pretty good. The follow-up episode is a bit weaker. It's a constant roller coaster of quality. There's still a lot of really cool action, and the most important thing this episode does is really bring Asami into the fold with the rest of our protagonists. Previously, Asami was just sort of like this pretty rich girl that Mako ran into, conveniently enough to solve a money problem, and acted as nothing more than filler for the love triangle shenanigans. But with her father now being the one bankrolling Amon, she now has her own motivations for being a part of future dealing with the Equalists. I think the idea that technology would eventually usurp bending bending is not only an interesting idea, but also sort of an inevitability. If it wasn't unbendable mechs made of platinum now, it would have been guns and drones in the future. Having this sort of tech versus superpower angle evens out the odds and keeps the stakes high even when Amon himself isn't present. It's not a bad episode by any means. I'd say this one holds a solid 7 out of 10, putting it in the upper B tier. Tarlok gets his full reveal as a villain here, despite it being pretty much on the nose that he was a slimy asshole the entire season. But as the episode title mentions, he's intended to act as the complete opposite extreme to Amon. It's a pretty strange choice to have him act exactly how Amon portrays benders. This episode gives off the energy that he doesn't really have a clue, and he doesn't understand that his actions will only bolster his opposition. Which, considering thus far he's been shown to be an absolute schemer, makes it feel very off from the get-go. As for the whole Team Avatar thing, I thought that having them call themselves that would feel like an insult to the original Team Avatar, but they do a really good job paying homage to them, and it feels more like they're inspired to be like heroes from folklore they've heard of since they were children more than they intend to replace them, so it's actually pretty charming. But then they do some vigilante justice in a car, and that's not exactly what I think of when I think of Team Avatar. That's what I think of when I think of Batman. Korra still thinks she can do whatever she wants, and she approaches someone with no plan other than Lamau, I'm the Avatar, just as she did with Amon, and gets fucked up again. Who would have thought? Hopefully this repeated scenario leads to some form of growth. 6 out of 10. Lower B tier. Chapter 9 is pretty much carried by these flashbacks to this super interesting time period where Sokka is a councilman, Toph is a chief of police who presumably erected a huge statue of herself right in front of the police office, and Aang is still the Avatar, but a little bit older. It's a good narrative through line to have Aang's past experiences against Tarlok's father tie into what Korra is dealing with, but one thing I don't really understand is why she's seeing his memories like that. I get that Korra is not a spiritual being at all, and Aang was extremely spiritual, but Aang could literally just manifest past avatars and have a conversation with them. And if Aang's spirit could come back and be like, yo Korra, bloodbenders by the way, she probably could have handled the situation a whole lot more smoothly. Finally, fuck. Amon is so damn cool. Look at him. What a unit. Really solid building episode. The climax is ramping up and Amon is only getting cooler with each passing scene he's in. 8 out of 10, I'll put it in the A tier. Bias alert. Thus far in the show, Lin is far and away my favorite character, and this episode is pretty Lin focused, so it's naturally pretty high up. I just like the combination of powerful and impactful earthbending with the grace of the wire things with her metal bending. Of course, having Lin do absolute badassery is a visual spectacle that can't be overlooked, but the airbender kids also take part in the fight, and it's cool to see that they're pretty proficient despite their age. What isn't cool is Milo, and I know that he's super popular for some reason, but Korra is intended to be a more mature show than Atla, and has themes intended for a more mature audience. So having a character that's pretty much just toilet humor sullies that aspect, and I don't even really find it that funny. As for the mature themes, having a character as important as Lin lose her bending defending Korra is a really powerful emotional moment. Also, hell yeah, Dante Bosco is back as a character named Iroh, which is like a fan service triple whammy. To cap it all off, we have this relationship drama with Asami and Mako, and
I saw you hanging out with
Korra
yesterday.
Rebecca, it's not what you think.
I won't hesitate, but
one interesting thing to note is how the scene of them fighting about Korra cuts directly to Penma walking up on Tenzin alone with Lin, and that situation is handled completely differently. I think this might be a purposeful juxtaposition to show the differences between their relationships. Anyways, gotta stop myself or I'll spend way too much time on the tiny details. This episode carries the same 8 out of 10 as the last episode. A tier. Very important backstory episode, and I think it's a really good story too. For Amon at least. It makes sense that Amon as the older sibling would be able to recognize the hypocrisy in his father's words and actions and rebel against it. Having something like that happen to him during his developmental years would make sense for it to turn into this anti-bending mindset. But he's also seemingly pro-Avatar in the confrontation with his father, and you'd think that Aang taking Yakon's bending would be sufficient evidence to Noatuk that the Avatar is a force of good, but I guess not. It makes much less sense for Tarlok though, as he was much younger and seemingly traumatized by the events, but then proceeds to do almost exactly as his late father wished, and only after failing did he realize how dumb that was. It feels like he's not genuinely sorry either, because he only apologized when there was no other option. It's pretty cool that Amon is so deeply and truly committed to the idea of removing bending from the world that he took it from his own brother without a second thought. 9 out of 10. You know me, I love when shit gets explained, and this one locks a ton of the puzzle pieces together. A+. Time for a bit of a polarizing opinion. This finale had so much good shit and payoff in it that it's actually detrimental to the quality of the finale. Remember earlier when I mentioned the focus on pro-bending and romance leading to book 1 having problems? No episode shows these problems more than this one. Almost every big moment feels completely rushed and it takes the impact away from all of them. I think that a lot of things in this episode, like Korra fighting Amon, Bolin and Asami fighting Hiroshi, Amon and Tarlok escaping, Korra getting her bending back and giving Linz hers, all those things could have had their own half episode or maybe full episode depending on which one it was. Instead, they're given like 2 minutes of screen time each. Tarlok deciding to kill himself along with his brother is hit or miss depending on the interpretation. If it's meant to be some sort of redemption, I guess it's fine, but I personally take it as him thinking that life is no longer worth living with his bending gone and his only option being to live on the run, which makes it seem more selfish than anything else. Korra running off and looking off a cliff, which some fans have interpreted as suicidal thoughts, has the potential to be an extremely emotional scene, but only seconds later Aang shows up and just ass pulls her bending back. Communing with past lives makes sense for the Avatar, but for Aang to have an actual impact makes him like a Force ghost, and it's pretty much on par with the Lion Turtle in terms of Deus Ex Machina. I don't know, it's still a good finale and everything, I just wish it wasn't so hasty with everything and it would have been a lot better. 7 out of 10, it's still good, but pretty disappointing. B tier. Alright, time for my final thoughts. Going into this video, after my first watch, I really didn't like The Legend of Korra. But when I'm actually ranking the episodes and I have to find things that I like and things that I don't like, it turns out Korra's not all that bad. It's not Avatar quality, and it's not a very good sequel to Avatar, but it's a good show on its own. I enjoyed watching it, and I will do videos on the other books. They probably won't come out immediately after this. They'll probably be spaced out quite a bit. But based on how this video is received, that process could accelerate exponentially. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button for tons of videos about ranking stuff and whatnot, and I'll see you next time.